Okay, today we're going to be painting Mozrog Skragbad. And before anyone gets into me, I know that Squigosaur isn't the same colour as the box art, but this one's way cooler and cool beats lore. So, first we're going to start with a Zenithal Prime. Nice flat black with the Vallejo black primer that I use, and then I'm using Liquitex titanium ink just to bring in some of that Zenithal Prime. Now I've done this in a few sub-assemblies because I want to concentrate on some of the details a little bit more easily without all the bits and pieces in the way. We're going to do the undershadow in this Leviathan purple, and again we're going to come in later and paint over this, but this just gives a little bit of depth to those colours, a little bit of warmth and interest. Make sure that we're getting all the separate little individual sub-assemblies that we got here, so that we get a nice even flow between them. Now I'm going to start with all the small pieces, and I'm painting everything that needs to be painted in metal with dark aluminium. So there's this little weapon that goes on the side of the Squigosaur and the exhaust port. So I'm going to treat actual Mozrog on his own, but these little bits and pieces that go on him I'm going to paint separately with the Squigosaur. So this little backpack that he has, this little thing that he sticks on, the Snakebite S is getting painted in titanium white here, and that's because I'm going to do it yellow, and then because bringing the yellow in over those purples and blacks is going to be a nightmare, so we're doing it in yellow first. Now I'm painting some of the parts of this exhaust in Retributor Gold, just to separate everything from the other, and this will also be doing later is adding some washes to this to give it a really good burnt up effect, so it's like really experience some engine heat. And then coming back to that S, painting it in lovely bright yellow. Make sure to get all the bits and pieces, but being careful not to get it onto anywhere else. Not that covering yellow is particularly hard, but it just saves time later. Nice and even coat. This is going to end up getting like 2 or 3 coats just to make sure that it's really bright yellow. There you go, as you can see, nice bright yellow. And then on these little horns, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to paint them in a nice deep red. So this is corn red. I'm going to paint the whole thing there, and then before it dries I'm coming back in with some Vallejo black, and I'm going to sort of wet blend the two, so I want this nice fade from red to black, just to give those horns an interesting feel. Now I'm painting some of these metal parts in dark aluminium. All the metal parts on this are in dark aluminium because I want the consistency through the model, and because it's a more complicated piece, this dark aluminium flows a little bit better than lead belcher. Just getting those little details on the S as well. All these little metal panels and screws, bits and bobs. Just being careful not to get into the yellow, because we really don't want to be trying to fix any messed up yellow. Okay, now I'm using some Wraith Bone here for the skull. I'm also going to use it for these little teeth or little bits of bone that hang off the horns as well. Just being careful not to get anywhere that I don't want it to, and this is going to need 2 coats, obviously being such a light, bright colour over such a dark base. Now back to the Squigosaur. What I've done is I've actually just quickly dry brushed a little bit of white into some of these areas where I've undershadowed in purple, and that's just so that there's a little bit of definition on some of these areas on the underside, because we do want a little bit of shape even though it is in the shadows of the actual figure. And I'm spraying the whole thing now in Frostheart blue. Well, not the whole thing, just the under area and a little bit over, and then I'm going to come in on the top with this Molotov zinc yellow. And when using the airbrush I get this nice blend between the two colours. You can do this with a dry brush, it'll take you a bit longer, maybe a little bit more difficult, but you get this really nice blend with the airbrush. And while I'm at it, I'm actually going to take that airbrush, I'm going to use that that zinc yellow as the highlight for Mozrog himself. So he's been undershadowed in purple, but we want that yellow highlight colour underneath, because when we come back to paint his skin in green, that yellow is really going to help us out. Now I'm using just a bit of Magmadroth Flame, lovely contrast paint, and I'm just spraying it into some areas of the Skragbad, just to give it a bit of colour interest, and it's a bit of definition is where we want a little bit more shadow in that yellow. So as you can see, just around some of the areas where maybe there's either a bit more shadow or a bit more blood flowing through his skin, and that just takes away from it being one big bright yellow balloon shape with a purple belly. And we get these nice interesting little bits of oranges and different purples where it hits the other colours. Now I'm using some titanium white again here, and I'm just going to pick out the dots of the eyes. That's for later because we're going to paint on black, but we want a bit of interest. And now I'm using Ziegfeld Burgundy on the tongue and the inside of the mouth. Now I want to do this first before I start doing the teeth, because if I go back to paint it, obviously I'm going to make a mess of it. But as you can see, just getting into all the areas of the mouth. And then I'm using some Mechanica Standard Grey for his teeth, because if we paint it in Wraithbone, they'll be kind of lost against this bright yellow skin. So using the dark just gives a lovely contrast, and really will make that mouth pop and draw a lot of interest. I'm also using it for these little spikes, stuck out bones on his back, as you can see there, all across the back, and all these little ones on the sides, and there's a couple on his low down near his tail. So I'm just making sure to carefully get all those and not go into the actual fleshy area, because that's going to cause us a real problem to fix. Now that we've done all that work with the airbrush, or if you've done it with a dry brush, fixing it and colour matching it could be a little bit fiddly. Not impossible, but definitely not something you want to be doing if you can avoid it. Now I've got some of the zinc yellow, and I've mixed that with some titanium white here, just because I want to desaturate it a little bit but also brighten it up. And I'm very carefully just picking out some of those really extreme high areas that I think would catch light a little bit more, and also just to draw with that added level of contrast, draws a bit more interest to that part of the model, keeps your eye there. And then here along this edge, rather than just giving one straight edge highlight, I'm sort of stippling it with the side of the brush, so it also goes over the edges, and we get a little bit more of a rough feel to that highlight, rather than just one straight line like you would put on a piece of armor. Okay, now I've got some Vallejo pink, and I'm going around the areas here where things sort of protrude from or go into Skragbad, like it's almost like it's an open wound or a raw bit of flesh. So here where this engine is sort of bolted into the side of him, I'm also going to do this around his teeth, and then on the other side there's like a stump where the weapon attaches, so I'm going to do that too. And then also around his metal leg. So just being careful not to cover up anything that I don't want to. Always take a couple of brush strokes, then take a sort of a step back from it. Double check you where you want to be before you add anything else, because obviously fixing it's going to be a real pain later. So as you can see there, just around the gums, I'm going to come back in and do the inside of the mouth with a different red, but on the outside to be nice and pink. Again, just being careful not to cover any of that grey or any of that yellow that I don't want to. I'm going just a couple of strokes at a time, making sure I'm where I need to be before I start adding in any more. I've also gone around the eyes, keeping that yellow, that bright white dot in the middle. Oh, we're nearly done there. But I think with the difference between the yellows and the blues and the pinks, we get a really nice pops of colour, really good contrast using hue and also saturation and brightness. Now I'm going to paint this little dribble in Frostheart Blue. I'm going to come back and put some dots later just to brighten up, give it a really nice wet shine with some dots of titanium white. But I'll do that later once all this is dry. Okay, just taking a minute to check on him. Okay. So we're just checking the, I like to keep double checking the fit on the base. We'll look at the base at the end. So here, what I've got is some Blood Angel's red contrast paint. I'm actually just sort of dripping this into the area underneath his tongue where it's still yellow. And the reason I've left it yellow is so that that bright yellow adds brightness to the contrast paint that we're adding in here. And then I can actually have it sort of bleed over the pink, so we get that nice transition between, even though it's inside his mouth, it's still fairly bright, so it draws your attention, but then it gets a nice transition to the outside. And I'm just being careful, very careful, not to cover up anything more than I need to. So fairly watered down with the contrast paint without thinning the paint too much. We just want to keep good control of it. Now, to add a real proper highlight, we're using some Rhinox hide for the leather strap that goes all the way around his belly. So again, being super careful not to cover up any of that skin, because fixing it's going to be really troublesome. Just very carefully getting that entire leather strap, and that thick dark brown line will add a really nice contrast. And because it's fairly desaturated here, it's not some super bright brown, it doesn't draw your eye away from the skin itself. It just breaks it up nicely and lets you know there's something there that needs to be paid attention to. So we're going to paint all the leather that's attached to the Skragbad in this dark brown, and we'll tackle the leather pants of Mozrog himself slightly differently. But I do think that the real focus point of this model is the Skragbad, not Mozrog himself. So really putting the effort into making the Skragbad the centre of attention. So as you can see, just getting those satchels and the saddle itself in that leather as well. Same Rhinox hide brown. And just being super careful to keep it nice and tidy. I think I had a moment there where I was thinking, should I paint these? Should I just leave them and paint them in the dark aluminium when I come to the metal? But I thought it'd be best to just get the whole thing done in case I decide to leave it. And then I think later on I realised that one of these wasn't actually a part of a buckle, it was actually part of a strap, so it needed to be brown anyway. So there you go, just getting in there. And I want to be careful not to get any on Mozrog himself, because I want that contrast to shade in the undercoats to pop through when I come back and do his pants. Now, with this Retributor Gold exhaust panel, what I'm doing is I'm giving it a wash in Seraphim Sepia. And what this does is it just yellows down and darkens it a little bit, gives it a wash and some colour interest. And now, while that Seraphim Sepia is still wet, what I'm doing is I'm getting some Druki Violet, and I'm going to sort of almost wet blend these two washes together, fairly watered down, so it's about 1:1 with the water, and I'm dragging that Druki Violet through the Seraphim Sepia to the terminus of this exhaust port, shall we say, because we want to start light, and then the closer to the edge it gets, the darker it gets, and there's more colour to it. So the Druki Violet goes, so it's Seraphim Sepia into the Druki Violet, and then what I'm going to do is, again, making sure that it's not getting too dry, I'm going to get some Drakenhof Nightshade, and I'm going to do that at the end as well. You'll see in a second. Just checking the colours, make sure I get a nice transition. It's not the clearest thing to see on this video, but when it starts to dry and the colours really come through, it's absolutely fantastic. Just a really nice touch to these things. So as you can see there, Drakenhof Nightshade, really dark at the ends, but we're only going to about a third, maybe even a little bit less of the exhaust port. We're just dragging it through those other shades, so we get that nice transition. Those colours really pop once the washes have dried. And we can come back in with some Retributor armor if you want to just pick out some of the details, but I find that this just works absolutely fantastically. Now with some Mephiston Red, what I'm doing is I'm filling in these little slots, these little holes in the symbol for his back. It gives us a nice little bit of contrast. Fills in. I feel like my original plan was to do this maybe with Null Oil, but I think it would have just been a little bit boring to have these just black holes on this thing, so you use the red instead. Now, again, dark aluminium for all the metal parts that are on the Skragbad. It'll be the same for Mozrog when we get it. We need to bear in mind we're doing his legs as well here. So these giant buckles that are likely holding this harness straight to his body, and also all over his artificial leg. Getting the whole thing, getting into all the little bits and pieces, and then because it's such a thick metallic colour, we don't really get a lot of that shadow through. But if we miss an area in the darker recesses, it doesn't really matter because we get a lovely little shadow as well. So just being careful, really careful, not to get any on the Skragbad. There we go. All over. We're going to do some of these panels in different colours just to break it up, and we'll bring some colour into the mechanics as well. But for now, with a fairly big brush, this dark aluminium really does flow really nicely into all those little bits and pieces. I feel like it's just a little bit more controlled than the lead belcher from Citadel. I'm just getting all those bits. I've also, as you can see there, I've done the little metal parts of his boots and the parts of his saddle. Now I'm using Garagak Sewer here to paint his pants, because the pants really aren't the focus of this model. They're sort of tucked away underneath him, between him and the Skragbad, so we don't need to spend a great deal of time on them. And this underpainting that we've done with the yellows and the purples is going to give us all the highlight and all the shading that we need through that contrast paint. And Garagak Sewer really does do a great job of bringing to life some leather, even though it's named after a sewer. So just being careful not to get into parts that we don't want to affect, but just letting the contrast paint do its work and flow into those recesses. Now I'm using XV88 for his belt buckle, which I've again just been very careful not to get onto with the Garagak Sewer. The belt strap itself, the XV88, all the way around his body. And then I'm just using some of the XV88 as well, watered down a little bit, just to get some of the edges of this leather strap. Now again, I'm not a big fan of edge highlighting, but there's a time and a place for it, and we really want to give as much love to this Skragbad as we possibly can. So I'm just going across the edge, but what I'm doing here is very carefully just feathering in some light lines to add some texture to this leather, which just feels a little worn. And I'm trying to keep that brush moving in a straight line, always along the bristles. So I've got as much control as possible when I'm doing these straight lines, and they're just using the very edge to get into the edges of the leather. And it's not too watered down, but I've got plenty of water in the brush to keep control of the paint flowing off there. Now I'm using some Mephiston Red for the stitching on his saddle, just because it adds a nice little pop of colour interest, because I don't think orcs are too busy worrying about matching leather stitching with leather shades. And also for this little bit of rope that's tied to his belt. There we go. Being careful not to get into those details. Some of this will be fixable, but we really don't want to try and fix the contrast paint. I think I used this was Blood Angels Red, I think this was again, just because I wanted an easier job on this little pipe. And by doing it in the contrast paint, I get the shadows without having to worry too much about highlighting it. And again, it's not a huge focal point in the model, so I don't want to come back and start working complex shadows with brighter and darker reds. And then I'm using some Black Legion contrast paint for his boots. Same exact idea as his pants. It's not the focal point in the model, but that undercolouring we did with the yellow and the purple will come through nicely with the contrast paint. So we get a good effect, good shape, but without too much drama. And we don't have to spend a huge amount of time on it. And some Retributor armor. I'm going to paint these 2 giant bullets that are on his strap to the saddle here. Can't have him without his ammo to reload. I'm just being careful because I'm going to come back and do that leather again with the brown because I missed it. Now Retributor Gold, we're still using that, and we are getting into some of the details of his artificial leg. Just to break it up a little bit because it's not all made of the same one kind of material. And I like to do it on cogs and springs and little discs. Just like that. Just to break it up a little bit. And we'll come back in and wash it all and tie it all together nicely. Oh, just getting a little bit of a gold smudge, I think it was, on his tail. Now I'm using some Ushabti bone for this panel here, and I also do the knee pads on Mozrog in this, and this needs 2, maybe even 3 or 4 coats just to make sure we get a nice even colour. Just be careful that we don't fill in the little holes there in the armour panel because getting that back will be a bit difficult. Administratum Grey, just getting to just put some edges on these teeth just to make them look super sharp and aggressive. And then come back with some white just for the tips, just to really make them stand out from the rest. Now we're also going to do this on all the little spikes on his back and on his real toenails, not his metal toenails. So with it a bit watered down, I'm also doing some scuffs in there so it looks he's got chips on his toenails. Just adds a little bit of detail. Nice interesting touch to the toes. Again here I'm just taking that second to myself just to really sit back and go, have I done enough? Should I push it a little bit more? Because we do want to push the colours, we do want them to pop and be nice, but it's so easy to go too far. I think we don't want to have to fix that. Okay, so here we are with the Nuln Oil. Getting into the metal parts. Not too heavily watered down, but a little watered down because we want it to flow in nicely. And we're getting into all the metal. This will bring the metals together and help them come to life a little bit easier. There we go. All that dirt and grime is going to sit. We have to make sure also while we're doing this not to forget to go back and do those other parts, the other sub-assemblies like his little gun and the exhaust ports and the back piece, so that we make sure that we get that nice tie-in with the colour. And then we're going to add some more over this with some rust effects on the feet and on the engine. But for now, lovely Nuln Oil doing its job, bringing all that metal to life like only Nuln Oil can. Okay, there we go. Just using some Flash Gits yellow to get some highlights onto this yellow back piece. Doing the edges and doing the top edges of each panel, and then edges along the side, just so it really stands out. We don't want to have it just look like this flat object that's been stuck on his back, so by adding these little highlights it just helps everything be tied together with the same sort of vibrancy. Now Seraphim Sepia onto this panel. What I'm doing is it's quite watered down, and I'm ending where I want it to be darkest, and then each time I go over this I'm starting a little lower, so I get, there you can see I'm building up at the edge because I want it to be dark, and then using the water to sort of drag that around put it where I want it to be. So we get this nice transition of shade. And do the same thing on the knee pads. And on those knee pads I did the little details in corn red, the two little lines, just because it breaks it up nicely. I'm using some Berserker Blood Shade. It's fairly watered down, and I'm very, very carefully getting this into some of the little recesses that he has on his face and his skin that look like little cuts and scars, because I don't want this to be a really bright red. I just want it to add a shadow, but I don't want it to be a shadow like the rest of the model. I just want it to look like either a fresh scratch or one that's starting to heal. I'm just, like I say, very, very carefully just using the very tip of the brush. There's quite a bit of water on here just to help it flow into these recesses without staining the actual area around the recess. So just trusting the brush and trusting the watered down wash to do its job and get in there. And then also, because it's an acrylic wash, it'll have a slight shine to it, which I think will actually really add to the effect of these scars. And I actually do this on, so doing all these scars, and I thought what I'll do is I'll go back and I actually did it inside of with the teeth, and this really I think put a nice touch onto the mouth. Like it's got these big sore gums that are all sort of oozing a little bit of blood, and as you can see, and that little bit of shine gives it that sort of more open mouth, wet feel. So it's definitely one of those that I took a bit of a chance. I do this to a lot of teeth, but I wasn't going to do this to this model originally, and I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go, and I'm really glad it came out the way it did. Now just back with some Shabti Bone, just to bring a little bit of that cleaner, brighter colour to that panel. Not too much, just from the top and in some little patches, so it doesn't look like one smooth gradient. There we go. Now I've got some really watered down Scrag Brown. This is I find one of the best ways to get a matte rust finish. Obviously I use dirty down rust as well sometimes when you want that really intense rusted feel, but this gives it more of a sort of in use rusted feel, I think, rather than a I've been out in the elements forever feel. So I'm just adding this to some of these recesses, some of these areas on his leg, but I also put it onto the metal part of his shoe and to the under part of the engine. So anywhere where water would have gathered and dripped down is where I'm looking at putting it. And then, like I say, it gives it this lovely rusted orange, but a really nice matte feel as well, without being as intense as dirty down rust. And just you can build it up as you want, you don't have to add too much. And now I'm just giving all of the metal a dry brush with Necron Compound, and that brings back a little bit of the highlight, goes through some of the washes so it's not quite so flat and even, and just gives it some wear and tear. Now this is obviously turned into quite a long video, so I've actually separated it into two parts. So I'll be publishing the second part soon, and in that part what I'll do is I'll just get into how I painted Mozrog himself and the base. But as you can see here, I've stuck on the exhaust port, I've stuck on the weapon at the side, so this part's almost ready to start assembly. So we'll see you in the next one.